Moving to a new state is a big decision, but not all places offer the same opportunities and quality of life, especially for Black communities. In this eye-opening video, Virtual Travel by Brian breaks down 10 states Black people should avoid moving to, revealing the hidden challenges that many face, from discrimination and systemic inequalities to lack of community resources and cultural diversity. If you're considering relocation, you'll want to watch until the end to see which states made the list and why they might not be the best choice. Whether it's due to racial disparities, legal injustices, or economic disadvantages, understanding the realities can help you make an informed decision. You might be asking, where do these states stand when it comes to the Black experience in America? Well, keep watching to find out. Before we dive in, drop a comment below and let us know. Have you lived in a place where you felt unwelcome? Let's start a conversation. Hit that like button, subscribe to Virtual Travel by Brian, and ring the notification bell for more content on African American issues, Black migration trends, and the best places to live. Let's jump right in. Number 10. Idaho. Idaho, the land of potatoes, breathtaking mountains, and, well, let's just say, not the most welcoming place for Black folks. If you're thinking about moving here, you might want to think again, unless you enjoy being the only Black person in a 100-mile radius and having people stare at you like you just stepped off a UFO. Now, don't get me wrong, Idaho is gorgeous. Majestic landscapes, wide open spaces, and some of the best skiing you'll find in America. But let's be real, skiing isn't exactly at the top of the priority list when you're dealing with racial hostility. And in some parts of this state, the idea of diversity is choosing between russet and sweet potatoes. Northern Idaho, in particular, has a history, and not the good kind. It has been a well-known hotspot for white supremacist groups, especially in places like Coeur d'Alene and Hayden Lake, which once served as the headquarters for the Aryan nations. Now, you might be thinking, but that was years ago, right? Sure, but let's just say the ghost of that era is still lurking. Many Black residents report feeling like permanent outsiders, as if they've crashed a family reunion where nobody invited them. According to the U.S. Census, Idaho is over 90% white, meaning finding Black community spaces is like trying to find a needle in a haystack, except the haystack doesn't really want you there. And if you're looking for Black barbershops, soul food spots, or any sort of cultural representation, yeah, good luck with that. You'll have better chances of finding Bigfoot out in the Boise National Forest. And let's not forget politics. Idaho leans hard conservative, and that often translates into policies that don't exactly scream inclusivity. Between strict voting laws, limited protections against racial discrimination, and an overall outsiders aren't welcome vibe, moving here might feel less like a fresh start, and more like stepping into an episode of The Twilight Zone. So, unless you really, really love potatoes and don't mind side eyes at the grocery store, Idaho might not be the move. But hey, if you do decide to take the plunge, at least you'll never have to worry about long lines at the Black hair care aisle, because there probably won't be one. Number 9. North Dakota. North Dakota, a place where winter lasts longer than most relationships, and Black folks are about as common as palm trees. If you're looking for a fresh start in a welcoming, diverse community, let me save you some time. North Dakota ain't it. First, let's address the obvious. This state is cold, and I don't mean grab a sweater cold. I mean, why do my eyelashes have icicles? Cold. Temperatures can drop below -40 degrees Fahrenheit, which is about the same level of warmth you can expect from some of the locals when you show up as one of the few Black residents in the state. Speaking of which, North Dakota is nearly 90% white, with a Black population of less than 4%. And let's be real, when you're that much of a minority, you tend to stand out. But not in a, wow, you're so interesting, tell me your story way, more like a, what are you doing here way. Many Black people who've moved here report feeling like uninvited guests at a party where nobody's making eye contact. And it's not just about being the only Black face in the room, it's about how you're treated. Reports of racial slurs, discrimination, and just an overall unwelcoming vibe aren't uncommon. Ever been somewhere where people stare at you a little too long, like they're trying to figure out if you got lost? Yeah, that's North Dakota. Now, if you're thinking, but maybe the job market makes up for it? Well, not really. Sure, there's an oil boom, but unless you want to work in a field where diversity is as rare as a warm winter day, you might be out of luck. And forget about finding black-owned businesses, barbershops, or even a decent plate of soul food. Your best bet might be shipping some seasoning from Amazon, because North Dakota cuisine is as bland as the social scene for black folks. So unless you love frigid temperatures, cultural isolation, and a serious lack of community, North Dakota probably isn't the move. But hey, if you ever do visit, bring your own hot sauce and maybe a heated blanket. Number 8. West Virginia. West Virginia, a state famous for coal mines, country roads, and, well, not exactly rolling out the welcome mat for black folks. If you're considering moving here, let's just say you might want to reconsider. Unless your idea of diversity is choosing between regular and extra crispy fried chicken at the one gas station that doubles as a restaurant. First things first, West Virginia is overwhelmingly white. I'm talking about over 90% white. If you're looking for cultural diversity, good luck. You'll have a better chance of spotting Bigfoot than finding a black community that feels like home. It's the kind of place where being black automatically makes you a local celebrity, but not the good kind. More like, what's a black person doing here? And let's talk economic opportunities, or rather, the lack thereof. West Virginia ranks among the worst states for jobs, especially for black professionals. If you're looking to climb the corporate ladder, you might find yourself stuck on the first rung, wondering why no one handed you the rest of the steps. The job market here is heavily reliant on coal mining and manual labor, and unless you're bringing a pickaxe and a strong back, you might find yourself struggling to find meaningful employment. But the biggest issue? The unwelcoming vibe. There's a deep-rooted history of racism in this state, and while every place has its issues, West Virginia seems stuck in a time warp. Reports of racial hostility, discrimination, and a general lack of inclusivity make it one of those states where you just know you're not exactly being embraced with open arms. And let's be real, if you can't find a black barbershop, soul food spot, or even a church where folks don't look at you sideways, is it really home? So unless you love mountains, coal dust, and being the only black person for miles, West Virginia might not be the move. But hey, if you do end up here, at least you'll always have a great view and plenty of country music. Number 7. Missouri. Missouri, a state that just can't seem to shake its history of racial tension, no matter how many times it tries to rebrand itself. If you're thinking about moving here, let me ask you this. Do you enjoy high crime rates, questionable policing, and feeling like you stepped into a never-ending episode of America's Racial Injustice special? If not, Missouri might not be for you. Let's start with the obvious. Ferguson. If you don't know about the protests that erupted after the police killing of Michael Brown in 2014, you might want to do a quick Google search. That tragic event didn't just expose Missouri's deep racial inequalities, it shouted them from the rooftops. The state's justice system has a well-documented history of over-policing black communities while somehow ignoring crime in areas that should be getting more attention. And speaking of crime, St. Louis has one of the highest crime rates in the entire country. It's consistently ranked among the most dangerous cities in America, and let's just say, if you value your safety, you might want to think twice before settling down here. But wait, before you say, well, maybe I'll just move somewhere else in Missouri, let's talk about the rest of the state. Outside of St. Louis and Kansas City, Missouri is basically and if you think racial profiling is just a big city issue, think again. Missouri law enforcement has been called out repeatedly for disproportionately stopping and arresting black drivers. Let's not forget the politics. Missouri leans heavily conservative, and while that's not automatically a red flag, it does mean policies that impact black communities often get ignored, dismissed, or outright denied. Public schools? Underfunded. Affordable housing? Good luck. Community resources? Hope you like driving across state lines to find them. So unless you enjoy racial tension, overzealous policing, and a state that feels like it's stuck in the 1950s, Missouri might not be your best bet. But hey, at least the barbecue is good, right? Number 6. Kentucky. Alright, let's talk about Kentucky. You might know it for bourbon, bluegrass and basketball, but if you're black and thinking about moving here, you should probably know it for something else: racial profiling, police brutality, and systemic discrimination. Yeah, Kentucky is the kind of place where you can get a world-class plate of fried chicken, but still get side-eyed just for existing. First, let's start with the elephant in the room: the 2020 killing of Breonna Taylor. Her tragic death at the hands of Louisville police put a national spotlight on Kentucky's deep-rooted issues with law enforcement and racial injustice. And while the protests that followed forced some tough conversations, let's be real, meaningful change is moving at the speed of molasses in January. But it's not just Louisville. Racial profiling is a statewide sport here, with black drivers being disproportionately stopped and searched. And don't even think about standing around minding your own business in certain areas. You might as well wear a sign that says, "Suspicious activity," because the cops might treat you like a walking crime scene. Then there's the political landscape. Kentucky leans hard conservative, which means policies that actually help black communities tend to get buried under the weight of small government rhetoric. Public schools? Severely underfunded. Affordable housing? Limited. Job opportunities for black professionals? Slim pickings. Basically, if you're looking for a place that supports racial progress, Kentucky is still trying to find the map. And let's not forget the racial demographics. Kentucky is about 85% white, and in some parts, seeing another black person might feel like spotting a rare bird in the wild. That's not to say there aren't black communities here. There definitely are. But depending on where you live, you might feel like the only drop of melanin in a sea of mayonnaise. So, unless you really love horse racing, bourbon, and being uncomfortably aware of how different you are in certain spaces, Kentucky might not be the move. But hey, at least you'll never have to wait in line at the black barbershop, because there probably isn't one nearby. Alright, if you're still with me, that means you're finding this eye-opening, or at least entertaining. But let me ask you, have you ever lived in a place where you felt completely out of place? Drop a comment below and let's talk about it. And hey, if you're enjoying this breakdown, go ahead and hit that like button so more people can see this. And don't forget to subscribe, because, trust me, we've got a lot more to uncover. Number 5. South Carolina. South Carolina, a state that looks beautiful on the surface, but if you scratch just a little bit, you'll find a whole lot of racial baggage. If you're black and thinking about moving here, just know that while the beaches might be nice, the vibes might not be. First off, history is everywhere here. And not in a "wow, this is fascinating" kind of way, but more like a "wow, they still fly Confederate flags" kind of way. South Carolina was the first state to secede from the Union. And let's just say some folks here still haven't fully gotten over the outcome of the Civil War. Drive through certain parts of the state, and you might think you've traveled back in time. Except instead of Downton Abbey, it's more like unfinished Reconstruction era. The sequel. Now let's talk about housing, education, and jobs, or rather how black folks tend to get the short end of the stick in all three. South Carolina has some of the worst racial disparities in homeownership, with black families facing higher loan denials and lower property values. Schools? Underfunded, especially in predominantly black areas. Job opportunities? Let's just say if you're black, your career options might feel like an old Blockbuster rental. Limited and outdated. And let's not ignore the racial rhetoric that still lingers here. Confederate monuments? Plenty. Thinly veiled racism in politics? Oh, absolutely. Some parts of South Carolina have a very particular energy, like when you walk into a room and suddenly feel like you shouldn't be there. The whole state isn't bad, of course. Charleston has some solid black history and culture. But step outside the city, and you might start hearing the phrase, "heritage, not hate," a little too often for comfort. So unless you enjoy navigating racial inequality, dodging Confederate bumper stickers, and wondering why your neighborhood's school hasn't been updated since The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air was on TV, South Carolina might not be the move. But hey, at least the food is good. Just don't be surprised if the welcome isn't as warm as the cornbread. Number 4. Arkansas. Arkansas, a state where the landscapes are beautiful, but the racial history? Not so much. If you're black and considering a move here, you might want to think twice. Unless, of course, you enjoy feeling like an uninvited guest at a very uncomfortable family reunion. First off, Arkansas has a long, ugly history of racial violence. Remember the Little Rock Nine? Yeah, that wasn't some distant past situation. It was 1957. And while you'd think attitudes would have evolved a bit since then, let's just say some parts of Arkansas still hold on to the good old days a little too tightly. And if you're thinking, well, maybe things have changed, let's talk about economic mobility. Or in Arkansas's case, the lack of it. This state ranks among the worst for Black professionals trying to climb the economic ladder. The job market is about as promising as a blockbuster comeback, and if you're looking for a thriving Black business scene, let's just say, don't hold your breath. If opportunity were a bus, Arkansas would be running about 3 hours late, if it shows up at all. Now let's address the unwelcoming vibe. Some areas in Arkansas still feel stuck in time, where seeing a Black person moving into the neighborhood gets the same reaction as a UFO sighting. It's the kind of place where stares linger too long, small talk feels forced, and "you're not from around here, are you?" is less of a question and more of a warning. And before you say, well, maybe I'll stick to the cities. Sure, Little Rock and a few other spots have a bit more diversity, but outside of those, good luck finding community spaces, Black-owned businesses, or even a decent barber. You might have to road trip to another state just to get a proper fade. So unless you love outdated racial attitudes, limited job opportunities, and feeling like an accidental time traveler, Arkansas might not be the move. But hey, at least the Walmart headquarters is here, so you'll never be too far from a rollback special. Number 3. Louisiana. Let's be real, Louisiana is fun. If you're looking for a place to eat amazing food, party in the streets, and soak up some of the richest Black culture in America, New Orleans is that girl. But if you're thinking about actually living here, especially as a Black person, you might want to pump the brakes, because behind all that jazz and gumbo is a whole lot of struggle. First, let's talk about incarceration. Louisiana has the highest incarceration rate in the entire country. And surprise, surprise, Black people are disproportionately locked up. It's almost like the system is designed that way. If mass incarceration were a competitive sport, Louisiana would be an Olympic gold medalist. And let's not forget the stories of horrible prison conditions, making this one of the worst places to get caught up in the system. Now, if you're thinking, okay, but what if I just mind my business and stay out of trouble? That's a great plan. But unfortunately, police discrimination is still a huge issue here. Even in cities like New Orleans, where Black culture is everywhere, racial profiling and police brutality remain serious problems. And if you're driving while Black, let's just say you might get pulled over just because your car was moving suspiciously. And then there's the economic situation. Sure, New Orleans is vibrant, but it's also one of the most economically unequal cities in the U.S. The cost of living keeps creeping up, but wages? Not so much. Outside of NOLA, job opportunities for Black professionals are about as rare as a bowl of unseasoned gumbo. They just don't exist like they should. And don't even get me started on hurricane season. Louisiana's infrastructure is questionable at best, and Black communities tend to get hit the hardest when disaster strikes. If you thought FEMA's response to Hurricane Katrina was a one-time failure, think again. Let's just say if you move here, you better have an escape plan. So, unless you enjoy economic struggle, unfair policing, and dodging hurricanes like it's a sport, Louisiana might not be the best place to settle down. But hey, at least you'll eat really well while considering your exit strategy. Number 2. Alabama. Alabama, a state that claims sweet home Alabama. But if you're Black, that sweetness comes with a bitter aftertaste. If you're thinking about moving here, just know that while the barbecue is top tier, the racial tension is still stuck somewhere around 1963. Let's start with voting rights, or should I say, the lack of them. Alabama has some of the strictest voter suppression laws in the country, and guess who they disproportionately affect? Yup, Black communities. It's almost like they took a look at the civil rights movement and said, let's just find new ways to make it harder for Black folks to have a say. From restrictive voter ID laws to felony disenfranchisement, Alabama works overtime to make sure Black voices don't count as much as they should. Now let's talk law enforcement. or as some might call it, Southern hospitality, with handcuffs. Black residents here are more likely to be stopped, searched, and arrested than their white counterparts. And let's not forget the racial disparities in sentencing, because if there's one thing Alabama is consistent about, it's making sure the justice system is not just. And while we're on the subject of systemic racism, let's not ignore the everyday struggles. Redlining, still leaving its mark. Job discrimination, alive and well. Confederate flags, you'll see them flying proudly in places that should have taken them down decades ago. In fact, some areas of Alabama still feel like they're auditioning for a prequel to Mississippi Burning. If you're black and thinking, well, maybe I'll just move to a bigger city like Birmingham or Montgomery, sure, you might find more black culture there, but you're still dealing with the same state policies that make life harder for black folks. And let's not forget education and healthcare, which rank among the worst in the country because nothing says, welcome home, like underfunded schools and hospitals that make you question every diagnosis. So unless you enjoy jumping through hoops just to vote, navigating racial tension like an obstacle course, and explaining why Confederate nostalgia is not a personality trait, Alabama might not be the move. But hey, at least the cornbread is amazing. Just don't expect the community to always be as warm as the biscuits. Number 1. Mississippi. If there's one state that just refuses to move on from the good old days, and by that I mean the bad old days for black folks, it's Mississippi. If you're black and considering moving here, let me save you the trouble. Don't, unless you enjoy racial disparities, underfunded schools, and feeling like you stepped into a time machine that only goes backward. Mississippi might not be the move. Let's start with the obvious. Mississippi is historically the most racially segregated state in America. And while it's been a minute since Jim Crow was officially on the books, the vibes are still very much alive. The state is still deeply divided along racial lines, from where people live to what kind of opportunities they have. Black communities here face higher poverty rates, lower wages, and fewer job prospects than almost anywhere else in the country. And let's talk about education, or what Mississippi calls education. The state ranks dead last in school funding and quality, which means if you have kids, you might want to budget for some very expensive tutoring, or just move somewhere else entirely. Because let's be real, Mississippi's public schools have been failing black children for generations, and the government seems just fine keeping it that way. Oh, and if you thought things couldn't get worse, healthcare is also terrible. Mississippi has some of the worst health outcomes for black residents, with higher rates of diabetes, heart disease, and infant mortality. The hospitals? Understaffed. The doctors? Scarce. The access to decent medical care? About as rare as a pro-black Confederate monument. And let's not forget policing, because in Mississippi, the badge doesn't always come with the best intentions. Racial profiling, police brutality, and the highest percentage of reported hate crimes in the country make this a place where you really don't want to get pulled over. If you're black and driving through certain areas, you're rolling the dice on how that traffic stop is going to go. So unless you enjoy low wages, bad health care, and having to double-check which towns still feel a little too sundowny, Mississippi should be nowhere near your list of places to live. But hey, at least the food is good. Just don't expect the opportunities to be as rich as the gumbo. And there you have it, the 10 states black people should avoid moving to. Now I know some folks might be thinking, but my cousin lives there, and they're fine. And hey, if you love it where you are, more power to you. But let's be real, when a place has a history of discrimination, racial profiling, bad economic opportunities, and an overall unwelcoming vibe, it might not be the best place for a fresh start. So what do you think? Have you lived in any of these states? Do you agree or disagree with the list? Drop a comment below and let's talk about it. And if you made it this far, you're the real MVP. Go ahead and hit that like button and make sure you subscribe for more eye-opening content like this. Until next time, stay informed, stay safe, and if you're thinking about relocating, maybe pick somewhere a little less problematic. See y'all in the next one.